And I can see here we have much more creative slides. So thank you, Madeline, for coming up with pictures of a tombstone and then pictures of a kid
A
in the
little kid.
desert that's buried
And you
into.
would combine it. Yeah.
It's for Headless and then RIP Imagine.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, so it's like, got it. Sorry, I thought that it was a kid that's buried in the desert.
And then somebody buried it in a graveyard again. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start with Imagine. So I think we've all seen that Imagine is canceled, or not canceled. It's going to go virtual for next spring, which is a little disappointing. But I think it's reality of where we're at in the world, that maybe everybody doesn't have the confidence that this virus will disappear at the end of the year or on March or November 1st or whatever the date is. And I think I saw that even the whatever the vaccine is going to not be widely, it's not going to be available to every person in the world next year even.
Yeah.
So we're probably dealing with it for quite a while.
Well, that's maybe the thing, that regardless of how you feel about the virus, it is there, and for event organizers, suddenly you need to cope with that. And I see also that a lot of event organizers are simply just taking up the opportunity also to turn it into a virtual event instead. So I'm kind of like eager to see like how where Imagine is going to end up with. But do you know, actually, Imagine is still going to be organized then by Magento/Adobe, right?
That's correct. Yeah, it'll just be part of Adobe Summit.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think they have a day just like they do for Marketo. But I don't know how they're going to do it virtual. I would imagine that since we have so much time, that it'll be a lot more planning that goes into it. And we'll see how that goes.
Well, and the Magento Association has now run a couple of conferences already, or well, not real big time conferences, but at least like hangouts. Let's I think hangouts for thousands of people in the community through Hopin, I guess. So it could be that Imagine is using a similar platform. So yeah, it's not only about a boring Zoom call with two guys that know each other and then making silly jokes forth and back, but it's much more than that. So a multi-track, I guess, people chatting forth and back, multiple places where you can meet up virtually. So yeah, it's kind of cool to hear that it's virtual and it's suddenly open and available for everyone who's able to join.
Yeah. So it will be interesting. I know you're doing Reacticon virtually on Thursday. I'm going to be joining Meet Magento Indonesia.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Yeah. So
well, it's kind of like the new way of organizing events. That's basically it.
Yeah. So I think that I when this whole thing started, I did a little Twitter poll that said, what do you miss most? And certainly the one that was most missed was real interaction with people. It's always nice to see people in person. So I think that's something that everybody is going to look forward to once we have events again that can be met, that can happen in person.
Yeah,
I'm certainly looking forward to doing that. I know that we're going to be doing Meet Magento Mexico. That happens November 6th, and that is going to be virtual. And I'm guessing that Meet Magento India will also be virtual.
Cool.
Just because I can't imagine that we'll be able to travel that soon.
To India. Yeah, and especially now that the numbers are going up that rapidly, especially in India. So yeah. Yeah, and it's what you say. It's always nicer to meet each other in person, and that's not only for the community insiders like maybe us. Like we can call each other friends, and then it's always great to meet each other in person. But even it's also good to meet other people and go out of your comfort zone because if it's an in-person event located somewhere physically. But yeah, that's not going to happen on short term. So this year, it's all going to be still virtual.
Yeah, and I think probably what makes it more difficult if we want to have a party. And for example, if you have your party, well, I guess it almost works. You could have your party at 9 p.m. and in the Netherlands, and that's only like 2 p.m. in Minneapolis. We could just start drinking early.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to organize Reacticon, as you said, in about 4 weeks' time right now. And there's going to be Eric Irway from Magento/Adobe as well. He's part of the Magento PW studio team. And last year I did a coffee with Eric Irway. So actually at the opening of the conference, people just dragged in a little table and chairs and a coffee pot and etc. in a rush just to sit down with him personally and have a coffee. But yeah, when he's about to drink his coffee, I'm about to drink my beer. So it's going to be a different thing because of the different time zones. Yeah.
Is that because it was at 8 a.m. your time?
Yeah, I saw you nipping from your iced tea before. Your iced tea.
Yeah, my 500 milliliters of whiskey for the next hour.
Yeah.
All right.
If Brent is a little bit slow during this podcast, and
yeah, it's not the internet; it's my voice.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
Let's keep moving. So Headless, let's quickly go over Headless and Headless. Things are changing, and they're always changing, right?
Yeah. So there's this little kid buried somewhere in the desert with only his head sticking out. But yeah, no. So things are on the move, yeah. So with Reacticon, I'm trying to keep up, or I try to make sure that the community on its own is also up to date on all of the different evolvements. But somewhere it's getting kind of like more chaotic every week or so. Not necessarily because Magento PWA Studio is not moving forward. So a lot of agencies or a lot of developers have thought in the past that Magento PWA Studio is almost coming to a standstill and nothing was happening. But actually, in the background, behind the curtains, basically the developers were just building kind of nifty features. And that's now slowly evolving into real cool features within the latest releases of PW Studio. So in PW Studio, the latest version, there's, for instance, extensibility. And slowly this brings up kind of like the opportunity for Magento extensions to be installed and then automatically do something within a PWA environment. But yeah, it's kind of like a similar thing that Vue Storefront and Deity and a couple of other PWA providers also did. Adding to that, Scandi is also one of those providers. But yeah, besides all of those standard PWA solutions, I'm also hearing more and more the opportunity of an agency just investing the right amount of time and then developing their own PWA solution from scratch, written in either React or Vue or theoretically something different. So the ecosystem is slowly getting the hang of it, but it doesn't mean that out of that chaos, only a couple of stable solutions pop up. It actually means that more and more solutions just pop up, and that the choice maybe gets more difficult as well.
Yeah, and I'm thinking in a past life, I remember a presentation you did. Was that at Magento India where you talked about your own version of it that you came up with overnight or something like that?
Yeah. So that was in a past life about 8 months ago or so, early February this year.
When we could meet in person.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it was the last time we met up. And then I was jokingly talking about my own little Juga project. And I created that within a week time just to prove to myself like which points are easy to create and which points are harder to create within the PWA. But yeah, I wrote it from scratch just to prove that you could also build it instead of just relying upon Magento PWA Studio. But yeah, it was kind of like an educational prototype, me just doing something for a couple of weeks last summer. But I do believe that actually it's up to the agencies to determine whether they want to rely upon Magento for PWA Studio, or that they want to rely upon Vue Storefront or Deity or Scandi, or that they want to build something from scratch. So it's all depending on how an agency or maybe a developer is relating towards this upcoming move, the whole headless movement.
Yeah, I think the interesting part of there's two pieces to that. There's the agency side, and I think agencies have to look at the fact that it doesn't have to be any one thing. It could be PWA Studio, it could be a Vue Storefront, but it also could be a Drupal. Like if you have a Drupal site, you could attach Drupal to it headless. And I think we're gonna, like I said earlier, we'll see Adobe Experience Manager also become part of that puzzle.
Yeah,
where some of that content is managed there. There'll be all kinds of bespoke, different solutions that are out there that may not even be a PWA version, but maybe something in a different platform on a different, however you want to build it, you could build it and they will come. I think the interesting thing then from a developer's point of view is, we're always trying to recruit developers, and a lot of times the first response from a developer is, oh, I'm not a Magento developer, I'm a React developer. Really? Okay, great. So, I think from your perspective, it would be interesting to say to a developer, like how much PHP you need to know and how much React you need to know, and where do those boundaries cross?
Yeah, so I'm actually quite busy with teaching developers get started with Headless, and it's both focused on Vue Storefront as well as Magento PWA Studio, but basically it's also about React in general and Vue in general. And it's slowly leading up to the point where I say that if a developer would ask me, which one do you prefer, Vue or React, then I say like, well, that's something I keep a secret or so. But if you want to determine yourself which one you prefer, you have to get started with it. And that's kind of the same thing with Vue Storefront and with PWA Studio itself as well. By getting yourself into it, then you can make a better choice for which one you prefer best. And that's kind of like the difficulty that a lot of agencies are now struggling with. They're struggling with which way to go, React or Vue, which PWA provider. And I think that what needs to be said as well is that PWA is also just another solution besides actually the let's call it the traditional front end of Magento. So the PWA hype is good in some cases. So some projects benefit from going the PWA route, but some other projects don't. And it might still be that an agency therefore is not going headless, not going to do anything with React or Vue, not going into the Adobe ecosystem either, just sticking with the old traditional Magento stuff. And I think it's all fine, but it boils down to making the right choice. So we see a lot of changes in the ecosystem, and headless is just part of it. And I think like the real challenge is not necessarily once you get yourself into React development, how to deal with that, but it's more that choice that you need to make beforehand, which is, well, something that we could talk about endlessly, of course. But yeah, it's again interesting to see the current times and the struggling that agencies sometimes experience.
Yeah, and I think agencies are going to have to make some choices, because if the Magento front end is going to be completely deprecated, which I think it is, and I think they've already announced that, and just like a calligrapher meeting the graffiti artist, the writing is on the wall. The developer is going to have to choose a path in the future in which they're going to go down. So I'm interested in your view on what a traditional Magento front end developer, what do they have to add to their skill set in terms of let's just talk about PWA Studio. What would they have to add to their skill set in order to become a proficient sort of let's call it a PWA developer in general, whether it's Vue or React? I don't think the difference is that much in those terms, but I think that that if you're going to choose PWA Studio, and let's just say Magento traditional front end goes away completely, either that developer is going to have to retool his or her skill set, or they're going to have to find a new job, right?
Yeah, well, but the difficulty is actually broader, I think. With Magento 1, we got used to this application that was a monolith. It was doing all of the things that you expected it to do, and because of that, actually, maybe it was serving its purpose. But once actually the features needed to be more enterprisey, or well, there needed to be more features added to Magento. With Magento 2, slowly the root began to not only build stuff within Magento, but also to rely upon external systems. So things like Varnish, Elasticsearch became more important. And I think the Headless story is part of that as well. And a lot of times, actually, a Magento backend developer is realizing this because a Magento backend developer is often dealing not only with Magento 2 backend development, with PHP and all of that XML shit, but it's also dealing with Varnish and with DevOps and with performance tuning in a larger server configuration. The universe is basically bigger than just Magento. And I think that the same counts for the front end as well. And a lot of Magento front enders got used to the old way that Magento 1 was working, but also with Magento 2. And they forgot about the fact that actually the front end technology was moving forward every week, every month with the release of new exciting features. And instead of actually embracing all of that, they just stuck to the old way, the Magento way. But yeah, that's basically where your point came in. The Magento 2 front end is now being deprecated, or it's going to be deprecated. And I don't really believe that the word deprecation is that bad. But I think it's much worse that actually the Magento 2 front end has been outdated from the very first start. Knockout, Require, it was already outdated when it came out, simply because front-end technology was just moving quicker than Magento 2 itself. So back to your question, like what should a Magento front-ender do to get him or herself into PWA Studio, or in generic, like a new front-end for Magento? I think it's don't focus on Magento, but focus on front-end technology, because if you're currently a front-end developer and you're working, you're happening to work with Magento itself, and you don't know what React and Vue and Angular and Svelte and all of these other things are all about. If you're working with CSS code in Magento, but you don't know about the latest developments in Less, you don't know about BEM and etc., you're not a real front-end developer. You're only doing a limited front-end stuff within Magento. So the real advice is just to expand your horizons, to learn more about what else is there in the front-end universe, and simply to realize that you can embrace that thanks to the headless approach that is becoming more and more mainstream.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that tends to happen is that if you are a front-end developer, you would turn over any work that has to be done in terms of modules to a back-end developer. And I feel like some of those lines are blurred now, where the front-end developer needs to know a little bit about how MVC works or something like that, so they can understand how the front end should be created, and even dipping into some of those features that are needed in terms of implementing their particular task with some back end.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like with PWA Studio, this is one of the exciting things for an agency. A front-end developer doesn't need to know anymore about the PHP object-oriented stuff. A front-ender only needs to know about React and then start building React components that only query the GraphQL API of Magento to pull in data or to maybe push back data. But it's all about dealing with an API instead of actually dealing with how that API came to being. That's the stuff for a backend developer. And I think like the promise of going headless, or the promise of going headless with a solution like based upon React, is that you can really separate the front-end team and the back-end team from each other. And then it becomes easier to hire a React developer, because a React developer actually doesn't need to know really about Magento itself. It only needs to know about, well, the e-commerce basics of what Magento is all about. What is a simple product? What is a downloadable product? Here's a GraphQL API, and go forth and query things.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that is a great example of how we can define those roles, and especially as we're moving forward and as planning, sort of doing some planning of your team and how your teams are made up. It does make a lot of sense that that even front-end developers now should be focusing on how their front end interacts with an API, and not focusing on the monolith of Magento. I think the other thing that is planned with Magento is they're calling it isolated services. They're not calling it microservices, but I think the plan is to split out catalog and split out other things, similar to now the way they've split out search. But you would be able to deploy your Magento catalog independently of other features in Magento. And as I understand it, they're not going to dig into each individual service, but there'll be a group of services that are together.
Yeah, but I think that's kind of like a more in-depth story. So for an agency, I think it's less important to know how the service-oriented architecture of Magento is evolving. It's much more interesting for maybe the backend developers to learn more about the internals of Magento, and how in the end modules could be created only for the catalog part of the application and not the checkout part of the application. But I think that's still something that we can just wait and sit and wait for Magento to spread the word, like, hey, there's now Magento 2.5 or something, and it's including this service-oriented architecture, and this is the way to deal with it. To me, the headless approach is it's very different. It's basically no longer that we can sit down and wait for Magento to be offering us the headless solution. If you're waiting for Magento to provide you the headless solution, then you're missing the point. The whole point about going headless is that we make Magento/Adobe responsible for that backend system, but we need to make the decisions upon the front end ourselves. And to me, that's really the exciting thing, that there's a lot of change happening, and for sure, like Adobe Sensei and all of that other stuff that Adobe is bringing in is going to make it interesting to for an agency to sell more features or develop new cool shops with add-ons. But what we're seeing currently with the headless movement is that we also require kind of like an identity change of those agencies. An agency needs to determine for themselves whether they want to go the React way or the Vue way or the old way or the highway. I don't know.
Yeah.